Thank you, Shantanu. I'm quite short compared to Shantanu, so it takes a little minute to adjust. Good evening, everyone, and I look forward to guiding this next segment. I was putting together some notes for the discussion today, and one question just kept coming back to me. I kept asking myself, how is it that we've reached this point where we are in the era of discussing climate change, but we're still fighting for gender justice? Climate change is no doubt one of the most defining moments of our lives, of our times. But gender equality and justice is the oldest human rights movement. We've been fighting this fight for more than 100 years. So how is it that we find ourselves here still, when the marginalization of women and children in the political and policy discourse should be a non-issue, but it still isn't yet? So in today's panel discussion, I'm going to ask our panelists to address these unsaid truths so that we can make an honest attempt to ensuring the women and children in India have access to the much needed resources to learn, lead, and thrive, a lot of which our keynote address and other people have said before us. We have with us three illustrious panelists today who draw very different insights from their real-world encounters on issues that cross over climate, to WASH, to economic empowerment, to health, to gender equity. Madam Winnie, I think you left the dais too soon, I'm afraid. I'm going to ask you to come back on stage and join us for the panel discussion so we can dwell deeper and unpack some of the points you mentioned in your keynote address. Our second panelist for this evening is Dr. Shagun Sabarwal, Director of Programs at Co-Impact. Co-Impact is a philanthropic organization that focuses on creating long-lasting systemic changes to governments and market systems. I think what sets them apart in many ways as a philanthropy is a very proactive approach that they take to ensuring women and children feature prominently in their grant-making work. And our last panelist for today, and the only man on this panel, is Dr. Aditya Bahadur, Director at the Red Cross Crescent Climate Center, an organization that works at the cross-section of science, policy, and practice to translate global insights into local action. He has a stellar record when it comes to climate research, and one of his most impressive accomplishments is that he has authored one of the IPCC reports a couple of years back. So welcome, all of you. While everyone gets comfortable, I'm going to take the chance to introduce myself. I'm Natasha Godinho, the Vice President at Global Health Strategies, where I work on health issues and everything that affects the health of our populations. As part of that, I straddle issues going from gender to nutrition to climate change, and I work across geographies in Africa and Asia. However, home for me will always be Goa. It's one of the most idyllic places in India that unfortunately is also feeling the harsh effects of climate change. I see my people struggling with coastal erosion, rising temperatures, cyclones, events that were considered rare till a few years back, but now are becoming far more frequent. Goa is not unique in its predicament, though. India is going to see this change on a massive scale, which is going to alter the lives of millions. And I say millions because climate change is not just a health crisis or a water crisis or a food crisis, it's so much more. And women and children just happen to be the face of this crisis. Years of inequitable social structures and patriarchal systems have left women in a worse off position than men. And the lack of access to financial resources, land ownership, and property rights have meant that women are far poorer than men. I'm going to share just two statistics before I move into the panel discussion, which were startling for me. 80% of all economically active women in India are employed in agriculture. Yet women own less than 50% of the land holdings. What this means is that even in sectors where women are the backbone of the workforce, there is still glaring inequality, which is only going to be perpetuated and deepened with climate change. And with little access to resources such as land, credit, technology, trainings, decision-making structures, women are going to lack the capacity to adapt to climate change. I'm going to begin today's panel discussion by doing a quick temperature check with our panelists. Sorry? It's cold. I'm going to ask you behind if y'all can warm up the room a bit, because I'm feeling a little bit chilly as well. But also a little temperature check on the climate change issue and on women and children in general. I want to ask you that you lean into your candid side and because I think this conversation deserves for us to show up with our most honest selves. In one sentence, I'm going to ask each one of you to answer fairly quickly and tell me that, do you believe India is prepared to handle what's to come with climate change? I'm going to ask you, maybe Shagun, Dr. Shagun, if you could start off, and then we can go that way.
Sure. I think it's not just India. I think the world is not prepared, and I think with every passing disaster that strikes, every passing heat wave that happens, I think the world is just taken aback, and we're definitely not prepared, I think.
Okay. Aditya, how confident are you? One sentence, one word.
Great policies, challenges with implementation.
Okay. Dr. Vinny, Madam Vinny.
I think we will do it when it becomes a crisis. India is great at dealing with crisis, but endemic problems which don't show up as, really kind of in-your-face serious issues helps to have people make it into that kind of a public consciousness of a crisis.
Okay, maybe don't put the mic down. Maybe I can follow that up with a second round. There's going to be 3 of them like this. In one sentence, could you tell me what you feel is the biggest challenge that India is facing? What's hampering them to actually take action now?
I'm going to come back to the wash sector. I think one of the issues which is not receiving perhaps as much attention, because for Delhiites at least AQI gets priority. Water is a very serious issue. We are very dependent on the monsoons. Climate change is increasing the uncertainties, reducing the time span sometimes in which rain happens, or making it happen at unexpected times. Runoffs are increasing. There is a very severe risk that we may not be allowing enough recharge, which is the only way of replenishing groundwater. So I think I would very strongly urge that all challenges around climate change must look very seriously at the water question.
Okay, so water for you, one sentence, one word for the both of you.
It's unfair for you to ask us that question and give us one sentence.
You can take 2 sentences.
If I was to really focus and distill it down to one important issue, I feel solving climate change is a systemic problem and requires work at the intersection of sectors. And therefore, our existing way of governance that is compartmentalized into sectoral ministries and departments isn't helpful. So I would say that's one challenge.
Fair.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with both. Just one thing is, I just spent last 3 days at a big climate conference for Asia, and I realized that a lot of the solutions that we are thinking of are also impacting climate negatively. So just to talk about AI and the big learning models, they really use a lot of water to keep them cool, or even the minerals that are needed. So to me, it's like we'll solve one problem and then have another problem. So that I think also deserves to be looked at.
And the last question, just to bring us back to the point about we're talking about women and children here today, do you feel there's a conscious understanding of the disproportionate effects that climate change is going to have on women and children, and is that actually being integrated into policy and practice? Yes or no would do for this one.
Perhaps not enough, but I think there is a general understanding that women can and should play a larger role, and I believe they are also.
Okay.
No.
So maybe I can start off with you, Dr. Shagun, because you spent a large portion of your career working at the convergence of health, economic empowerment, and gender justice. What do you feel? Why hasn't policy making really translated into creating safe, secure, well-integrated spaces for marginalized communities, especially women and children, to be able to function in?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I also want to say it's such a pleasure to be here. I had worked with Vinny ma'am many, many years ago in a different avatar when she was a health secretary, and later when she was the chief secretary of Punjab, so it's really a pleasure to be here. I think what I would say, and I would build on what ma'am was saying as a part of her keynote, I think when you think about this idea that all of us who are in the development sector, or most of us, our holy grail is to reach impact at scale, right? So we want to be able to influence millions and millions of people. And the government systems are, the public systems, whether it's health, education, are kind of being designed to get to those, right? But even in this effort, many times we leave behind the ones who most depend on the system, find it the hardest to reach, right? And we see that when we look at learning outcomes, you look at your sexual and reproductive health outcomes. I'm not even talking about climate right now. So what then happens is that the systems are being designed for an average response, right? Like, will it work for the average person? But the people who are marginalized, who have, and especially women and children, we all know face very different barriers. So even the example of taking loan, if a woman is a woman entrepreneur, she finds it very hard to navigate the banking system as compared to a man for a whole host of reasons, right? Or even water management. You know, we work with this nonprofit called Pradhan, and they are doing this initiative where they're trying to bring water governance to women. So first is that the systems per se, if you just take that systems approach, technocratic approach, big scale approach, you will miss out on these. But what is also very important is to work with the communities to understand what they do. And many times that piece of work becomes going deep, working with communities, but that doesn't come into the scale equation. So there are these polarities which are not speaking to each other. And so I think going back to the point that ma'am was making, through partnerships, and in some sense, if you work with organizations, civil society organizations that have that grounding into what the communities need, where are they being missed out, and link them and align them with what the systems are doing, then you can really have magic. And we have so many such partners, Arman, who are actually bringing AI and technology to get there. So one last thing I'll say here about climate is that when it comes to climate, rather than thinking only about new things, we have to see how can the climate response be integrated into current systems. So our social protection systems, the social protection systems are designed to target the most vulnerable. They have huge reach in India. Can we start to integrate? And it's happening now, right? So I'll stop there. This is my passionate topic, so I can go on, but.
No, I really appreciate that. And Dr. Aditya, I'm going to bring you in here because you've done work to understand how can you take policies from just being tokenistic in nature to make them very well integrated and meaningful in many ways. So can you actually speak to some of the points that Dr. Shagun brought up to say how countries have managed to do that and where you see those positive examples?
Yeah, so I completely agree with that. I think for me, the answer lies in the concept of localization, which I think is underappreciated, but starting to gain more and more momentum. The more we localize, the more we can target the vulnerable better, the more we can make sure that our policies are being operationalized effectively. I was privileged enough to be part of a movement around locally led climate adaptation, where we developed a set of principles and then got 150 entities, including governments, multilateral banks, bilateral organizations, to sign up to them, which essentially commits them to developing local leadership on issues of climate adaptation. And I feel like those are the types of processes that are going to deliver rich gains few years down the line. And there are two very notable examples on where localization is being taken very seriously. One is USAID, which has committed to, if I'm not mistaken, 50% of its total investments and programs going down to local actors and organizations by 2030, which is a huge amount because, if I'm not mistaken, is under 20% at the moment. So it's a very serious, high ambitious commitment. And the other is, we don't have to look too far. I feel like India's social protection program also demonstrates how you can localize effectively, where funds for Manrega are effectively controlled by local institutions. And there are moves to integrate climate risk in Manrega, which I'm confident in the years to come will deliver rich gains. So I would say localization is a very important solution to the problem that you mentioned.
Thank you so much. I think that's similar to the lines that Shagun brought up earlier as well. Madam Vinny, maybe I can bring you